Welcome to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. A massive article was released yesterday in Vanity Fair called Star Wars: The Rebellion Will Be Televised. The article basically focuses on the upcoming television series, stream series that are going to be on Disney Plus, which are currently The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, and then the upcoming Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Cassian Andor show, and then one about Ahsoka. So initially it's focusing on these new programs that are coming out, but it has some interesting little tidbits in here. So the first one is to come to this paragraph here, because this is where it's talking specifically about Kathleen Kennedy and the sequel trilogy. I'll read these two paragraphs here. It's the theme that binds all the new shows, devotion. What's unique about Star Wars is that we're one story, basically, says Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy. George was always dealing with episodes. Ironically, he was serializing his storytelling. He was influenced by Flash Gordon and cliffhangers on Saturdays at movie theaters. All of that informed what the DNA of Star Wars is, which is why I think it's just organic that we made the transition into television. So the focus is to move away from the films, it would seem, but there's some other interesting tidbits in this article. The transition was not an obvious pivot for an empire built on movies. When she took over Lucasfilm in 2012, Kennedy's primary goal was to rejuvenate Star Wars with a new era of films. Now, I don't think Star Wars needed to be rejuvenated. It was still doing quite well with the animated series. And while the prequels may not have been as successful as the original trilogy, they're still pretty much well loved by most fans. After a trilogy of prequels that underwhelmed many fans, few producers were better poised to do that, given her legacy of crowd pleasers ranging from E.T. to Back to the Future and The Sixth Sense. Yes, let's hear it for Kathleen Kennedy. By the end of 2015, Han, Leia, and Luke were back on the big screen in J.J. Abrams' The Force Awakens. Well, yes, that's because all of the actors were alive at the time, and as I talked about in the second part of my declining interest in Star Wars video series, this was a huge wasted opportunity because they didn't bother to show the three of them together on screen. And that will never happen. Which introduced the desert scavenger Rey, yes, let's just call her the Mary Sue Rey, the redemption-seeking stormtrooper Finn, who in The Last Jedi was demoted from main character to a secondary comic relief character, the X-Wing hotshot Poe Dameron, who was also emasculated by Rian Johnson in The Last Jedi into being a mutineer, and the brooding Sith wannabe Kylo Ren. Yes, he was the big crybaby of the films. He did do a good job of being a crybaby. I will give him credit for that. Rian Johnson's sequel, 2017's The Last Jedi, continued the Skywalker saga. Yeah, it really continued it, as it came to be known, but veered sharply from Abrams' vision and seemed to close off some central storylines. That's because he didn't really care what had come before it. He took that thing and he was going to do whatever he felt like with it. And it was atrocious what he did. Abrams U-turned back when he returned to 2019's final chapter, The Rise of Skywalker, which was supposed to have been Trevorrow's film, taking over Episode 9 late in development. The movies all earned billions, but the zigzagging narrative was conspicuous. Yeah, that's about the biggest criticism they're going to make about the sequel trilogy, that it was a conspicuous zigzagging narrative. Yeah, it was a waste of time is what it was. So what's interesting, though, is Rian Johnson gets mentioned again in this thing. And if you recall, even before The Last Jedi premiered, Lucasfilm had announced that Rian Johnson was going to produce a trilogy of movies of his own. And very little has ever been said about that ever since. But this article actually talks about it. And again, Kathleen Kennedy says that we have a roadmap. Yeah, I don't think they had one for the sequel trilogy. We have a roadmap, Kennedy says, although Lucasfilm's big screen return is unlikely to follow the same relentless cadence as before. A movie from Jojo Rabbit's Taika Waititi and 1917 screenwriter Christy Wilson Cairns will likely arrive first, with Rogue Squadron from Wonder Woman director Patty Jenkins further off. Is it true that Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige will produce a Star Wars film? I would love to see what movie he might come up with, Kennedy says. But right now, no, there isn't anything specifically. And the trilogy from The Last Jedi's Rian Johnson that was announced 5 years ago, backburnered. Rian has been unbelievably busy with Knives Out and the deal that he made at Netflix for multiple movies. In other words, Rian Johnson, who signed to do Knives Out after he agreed to do this trilogy and these Netflix movies, that's taken precedence over doing this sequel trilogy of movies that he was allegedly going to make. So they're still planning on doing it. You know, what this article doesn't say, but what comes across very clear, is that Kathleen Kennedy really does not know what she's doing as president of Lucasfilm. She genuinely has no clue what she is doing. And there is only one quote-unquote mistake that she admits to. And I'll take a look at this other article from Variety, which is a kind of a watered-down version of what was presented in Vanity Fair. And basically it says, Lucasfilm vows not to recast iconic Star Wars characters after Solo flop. We can't do that. Well, this is very interesting, and this is where a little bit of decoding might be needed to really understand what this is saying. Because this was also basically buried inside of the very lengthy Vanity Fair article. Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy told Vanity Fair that the company has learned never to recast iconic Star Wars characters following the flop that was Solo: A Star Wars Story. The Ron Howard-directed 2018 movie cast Alden Ehrenreich as a young version of Han Solo and hotshot space pilot famously brought to life by Harrison Ford. Many critics and fans felt Ehrenreich just couldn't capture Ford's magic. Well, the whole movie was problematic. It really didn't do well in theaters. It was a huge financial flop, the first real Star Wars flop that has ever occurred. There should be moments along the way when you learn things, Kennedy said. Now it does seem so abundantly clear that we can't do that they can't recast other characters. Well, other franchises have done that with no problems, and in fact, they did that in Rogue One because there's a different actress playing Princess Leia at the end of that movie. So clearly, yes, you can do it. I'm not interpreting this in the way that I've seen some other people look at it. To me, this is kind of code words to say we're not planning to go back and look at the other characters that George Lucas created that much. They want to focus instead on the sequel trilogy characters because you don't really find much in the way of criticism in the Vanity Fair article about the sequel trilogy and none in this article whatsoever. The movie just really wasn't that good. You know, it wasn't a really well-inspired plot. They felt a little too much need to try and explain things from A New Hope, like the Kessel Run. I feel bad for Ron Howard, who came in to try and work on the thing, because he only had a few months to try and patch this thing together to make it work. And I don't really know what state it was in before he came in. But Solo: A Star Wars Story was a flop, not because they had recasted Harrison Ford, but because it just wasn't a good movie. That's really what it boiled down to. Sure, there's criticism of why he was recasted, but you can't take an old actor like Harrison Ford and then have him play a younger self, even younger than when he portrayed Han Solo in 1977. That's just not physically possible. So again, to me, this is very coded because it's saying they don't want to necessarily go back to the old characters, which means what? They want to rely on the new characters, which is why they are still keeping this Rian Johnson trilogy on the quote-unquote back burner. I, for one, still have no interest in it, and I really don't know when they intend to do it. Why would you even say this is still in the works when nothing is being done? That just seems really pointless. I really don't understand why they think that there is even any appeal for it at this point, given how many fans now don't like The Last Jedi or what Rian Johnson did in that film. I, for one, can't stand that movie, even though it's not as bad as what J.J. Abrams came back and did in Episode 9, because that was truly deplorable. But this is an extremely long article in Vanity Fair. If you want to read it, there's nothing wrong with going in and reading it. It's extremely long. So, and that's why I'm not really touching on it too much, because it just goes into so much detail on a lot of things. So I really only wanted to hit a few highlights on it. But ultimately, what it says to me is Kathleen Kennedy still doesn't really know what she's doing. And who knows where the Star Wars franchise is going to go in the future. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to see more of our videos in the future and help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.